Hafaday and good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today for a Guam War Survivors Remembrance Day flag raising ceremony. I'm Crystal Paco San Augustine, Director of Communications at the Office of the Governor of Guam, and I'm joined by Chirag Bajwani, Director of Policy and Communications for Vice Speaker Tina Munya Barnes. At this time, I want to recognize our distinguished guests joining us this morning. Of course, the Honorable Lourdes A. Leon Guerrero, Magahagan Guahan, Governor of Guam. Chief Justice Philip Carbolito. Speaker Therese Terlahi and members of the 36th Guam Legislature. Admiral Benjamin Nicholson, Hafaday. As well as the various command staff of the Armed Forces Stations of Guam. Attorney General Leven Camacho. OPA and former Chief Justice B.J. Cruz. Former Senators Larry Kasperbauer and his wife Carmen. As well as former Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano. Consul General Toshiaki Kobayashi, Hafaday. And last but not least, and most importantly, our honored guests are members of Guam's greatest generation, our World War II survivors, the reason why we're all here today. I kindly ask that you stand, if you can, for the presentation of colors by the Joint Service Color Guard, as well as the National Anthem and Guam Hymn to be performed by the 721st Army Band, Guam Army National Guard. Please turn to the right, facing the window.
Thank you. You may now take your seats. At this time, we'd like to call on the Honorable Therese Terlahi, Speaker of the 36th Guam Legislature, to deliver her welcoming remarks.
Hafaday, Manana Situans, and good morning to everyone, especially all the dignitaries who are here with us in person and those who are joining us virtually, and most especially to our dignitaries of our war survivors. We are here today to celebrate War Survivors Day, which prior Guam legislatures put into statute that we will recognize every year. And we had been recognizing them every year, but we wanted to make sure that every generation will never forget. We call them our greatest generation, and that is because of what they've been through. And I want to read from the Guam War Claims Commission findings. I want to acknowledge that Speaker B.J. Cruz was one of those members of that commission, a federally nominated commission or empowered commission to make findings regarding Guam and what they had been through. In that commission's findings, they include many witnesses testified that Japanese soldiers evicted them from their homes and took all their food and livestock. They were forced to march great distances to 3 different concentration camps with little or no time to collect provisions, resulting in many of the elderly dying along the way or shortly after arriving at the camps. The condition of the camps was horrendous. There was little or no shelter. They had no food and water. Some were near a small river, but the river was very polluted with human waste. Able-bodied Chamorros were forced to work on different projects. Some worked in military construction, such as airstrips or coastal defensive positions. Others had to work on farms or rice paddies. Some had to work on multiple farms, hiking vast distances and over sloping hills each day, not only to one farm, but then later in the day to another farm. They were forced to do it every day, whether they were healthy or not. If they were unable because they were sick, they were beaten and threatened with death. The local inhabitants were treated in the most brutal, cruel, and despicable manner. Many of the survivors testified that they continued to endure the psychological effects of the war. The Review Commission is not aware of any comparable situation other than Guam, where virtually the entire population was either interned in hiding to avoid capture or subjected to forced march at one time or another while under Japanese occupation during World War II. The Review Commission finds that the Japanese occupation of Guam was particularly cruel, oppressive, and brutal, and that the loyalty and steadfastness shown by the people of Guam in the face of the atrocities and barbarism inflicted on them by their Japanese occupiers was all the more extraordinary in the circumstances in which they were forced to live. The Review Commission affirms that there is a moral obligation on the part of our national government to pay compensation for war damages in order to ensure to the extent possible that no single individual or group of individuals bears more than a just part of the overall burden of war. And so to you, many of you who were young children and who have helped us by describing to us what you've been through and what your families went through in those days, we honor you today in this humble way. We honor you and what you have done for us and how after the war you led us in building Guam to the prosperity that we enjoy today for your children, and you did it all for your children and your grandchildren and for future generations, and you built a strong foundation that we are all benefiting from. And we know that you did this because of the values that you hold and the values that you have imparted to us and that we must impart and continue to practice. Inafat maulik, inak gofli'i, many more. These are what get us through the trying times that we face today, and these are what will get our children and their children through the trying times that they are going to face. Thank you for leading us in this. That is your legacy, and we honor your legacy today. Situs Maasi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Speaker. I now want to welcome to the podium the Honorable Frank Blas Jr., Senator for the 36th Guam Legislature, and he's also from the Guam War Survivors Foundation.
Hafadates and Mananasis, welcome to all of you. Governor, thank you very much for gracing us today. Members of the Armed Forces, thank you as well. But most especially to our Manamku, to our greatest generation, Sizus Moasi, and thank you for being here. I stand here not as a senator with this esteemed body or as a president of the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation. I stand here as a proud son of a war survivor to say, in behalf of our generation, the generations to come, thank you very much. Thank you for all that you've had to sacrifice, all that you've had to do, all that you have taught us on how to live our lives. Today is your day. Today is the day that the world remembers your suffering. Today is the day that the world is going to remember and going to honor you for what you've had to endure. Today is a long time coming, in that in previous years, we sometimes is mixed with other celebrations. Not to say that we shouldn't celebrate, or we shouldn't be thankful for the liberation that you had experienced, or to remember the areas that you had to live in or live at during the occupation. Today is the day that the world, today is the day that our island, that our generations, for generations to come, is going to remember all that you've had to endure individually, all that you've had to endure as a family, and all that you've had to endure as a people of an island that was trying to survive and did. Today is your day, and I want to thank you for that. On behalf of everybody that's here, thank you very much. I'm going to keep my speech short and sweet and simple because it's your day. And I would rather want to hug you and thank you and kiss you and say, it's because of you that I stand here. It's because of you that we stand. It's because of you that this stands here. Actually, I want to share a story with you as to why this all happened. Okay? In 2009, went off to Washington, D.C. with my colleague, Senator Tina Rose Muñoz Barnes, and my wife. One of the things I found out is don't take two women to Washington, D.C., gentlemen, because you're going to be carrying a lot of shoes. And after I think the Admiral knows what I'm talking about here. And after meeting on the Hill with several representatives, the two ladies wanted to go see some exhibits, and they wanted to go see at that time, the Holocaust exhibit. This was the exhibit that they had in honor of the war in Europe. Very beautiful in as far as humbling the display. Pues what they wanted to do after that is, okay, we saw the European side, let's go see the Pacific side of World War II. So the only place I knew that had the exhibit was the Smithsonian Institute, and we went there, and there was the War in the Pacific exhibit. That exhibit was about twice the size of this hall. And we went around the exhibit looking at the different artifacts and depictions of what war in the Pacific was like. And off on the far corner was a 18-inch by 34-inch poster that had a depiction of the island of Guam with a huge red arrow towards Japan, and it said, Guam, offensive starting point for the invasion into Japan. Period. Nothing of the atrocities, nothing of the suffering that its people had to endure, nothing of the fact that this island was the only, has been the only occupied or American soil that has ever been occupied by an enemy force, foreign enemy force in any war that it has ever been in. Nothing of the 22,000 people who were forced to be enslaved and occupied. Nothing of the 1,100 Chamorros that were killed defending and because they were loyal to their country. How's that? It was then that my wife turned to me and says, what about our people? It was then that it was our resolve to ensure that that day forward, not only the people of Guam, but the world will know that you are representative of the greatest generation that this world has ever seen. You are the epitome of bravery, of sacrifice, of honor, and of faith. You are the reason why we are here today. So on behalf of the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation and I want to say on behalf of my colleagues, who many of them have unceasingly have ensured that we continue to honor you, on behalf of the people of Guam and my generation and the generations after me. Today is your day. Go to Ross and take advantage of your discounts. Okay? Esta. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Blas. At this point, we'd like to call on Vice Speaker Tina Muñoz-Barnes, who will be joining us virtually. The Vice Speaker is also representing the Menengan Memorial Foundation. Thank you.
Over 80 years ago, our island experienced one of the darkest moments in history. Our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were forced to experience a suffering none of us could even imagine, made to live with scars that will never truly heal. Caught up in a war not of their making, each of them has a painful story. But it is important to remember that their story is also one of hope, because for every moment of hardship, brutality, violence, and destruction, we also see moments of courage, perseverance, resilience, and strength, of neighbors helping neighbors, of a community refusing to give up its culture and values, and perhaps even a flash of sympathy from a reluctant enemy. I truly believe that despite the chaos and uncertainty, it was because of their faith in the Lord and in their community, our greatest generation was able to fight their way back into the light. This is why every year on June 28, we honor the survivors of World War II and ensure no one forgets what they have been through. Because by acknowledging this absolutely unimaginable and violent moment in our history, we take it upon ourselves to prevent it from ever happening again. I ask everyone listening here today to cherish the little time we have left with our war survivors. A great many of them have since passed on. Let us listen to their stories, learn the lessons they have to share, and remember that there is a high price for freedom. As the chair of War Survivors Remembrance Day Planning Committee, I am thankful for everyone being here today and for the continued partnership and support from the war survivors and the Menengan Memorial Foundations, Governor Lou Leon Guerrero, Lieutenant Governor Joshua Tenorio, our members of Congress, Rear Admiral Benjamin Nicholson, Insular Affairs Deputy Assistant Secretary Keone Nakoa, former Assistant Secretary Anthony Babalta, and my colleagues, Senator Amanda Shelton, Senator Frank Blas Jr., and Senator Mary Camacho Torres. I'd like to also thank our staff for their work planning this event. And while I am sad I can't be there with all of you, I thank the Archdiocese of Agana for hosting the Mass, and I ask that you all continue to pray for my husband, Jake. Our greatest generation paved the way for us today, endured unspeakable atrocities, and paid the price for the freedoms we take for granted. Let us thank them not just for today, but every day. Undanklo na si Zeus Masi, si Zeus ang binidisi hamzo todos, sansay na Masi.
I want to keep your attention to the TV screens for a video message from the Honorable Keone Nakoa, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Interior, Insular Affairs.
Hafade, aloha, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Guam from Japanese occupation. As the nation prepares to celebrate our Independence Day on July 4th, and Guam prepares to commemorate its Liberation Day on July 21st, it is important to remember the sacrifices and atrocities that our war survivors endured during the period of Japanese occupation. Our war survivors serve as a reminder of the importance of global peace and stability. In 2019, the Department of the Interior endorsed H.R. 1365, which was enacted as Public Law 116-132 on March 26, 2020. As we know, this law modified the use of deposits in the Guam World War II Claims Fund and allowed the U.S. Treasury to start distributing war claims payments to bring a close to this dark chapter for the people of Guam. To date, the Interior has withheld $39.7 million for the Guam World War II Claims Fund, and the U.S. Department of Justice adjudicates these claims, and the U.S. Treasury processes the payments for the approved claims. Today, the Department of the Interior stands with the people of Guam in remembering the territory's war survivors. May God continue to bless you and to protect you and our great nation. Mahalo nui loa.
Thank you so much. At this point, we'd like to call on former Assistant Secretary of the United States Department of Interior, Mr. Anthony Babalta.
Buenas, Hafide, good morning. Thank you all for joining us here today. Governor, Madam Speaker, the Chief Justice, members of the 36th Guam Legislature, the members of the Diplomatic Corps, and most importantly, our war survivors. We honor those who died and lived through the occupation of Guam this morning during World War II. And unlike our July 21st celebration, War Survivor Remembrance Day is one that asks all of us to pause, not to remember the U.S. forces who landed on Guam to fight against and eventually defeat our occupiers. Today, we take stock to remember the civilians who lost their lives, grandfathers and grandmothers, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, children. And we continue to celebrate those brave Chamorros who withstood the horrors of occupation, preserving hope of peace and freedom of pre-occupation Guam, and who remain with us today. We honor you, and we remember the time that conflict interrupted your lives with unspeakable suffering and pain. Preserving freedom can exact a heavy toll, and beyond World War II, for both our nation and our island, only those who have served in our armed forces know the tragedy of war. Such men and women who have fought in the Korean, the Vietnam, the Gulf, or the Iraq wars are the ones who know the devastation of armed conflict between our country and others. But theirs was a role of soldiers and warriors. Being here in Hagåtña, just steps away from the cathedral, we are reminded about the events that pressured and tested the people of Guam's courage, resolve, and faith. We have all listened to the stories of our war survivors for decades on our quest for war reparations. For many war survivors, their story begins around here as they made their way to the Hagåtña Cathedral to celebrate one of our holiest days. On December 8, 1941, Guam endured one of the most tragic and horrific enemy occupations during World War II. For 4 hard years, our people were enslaved and suffered terribly with abuse, detention, and torture. But ultimately, guided by their faith, they rose up to the challenges and survived. A peaceful people thrown into the middle of one of the most devastating wars in modern history, and to come out stronger and resilient. This is what made our war survivors the greatest generation. And above all else, the people of Guam persevered and continued to tell their stories. Their sacrifices paved the way for the peaceful society we live today. As we honor the souls that have been taken, let us all be grateful for the lives who endured and survived to tell us their stories. No matter the pain, no matter the suffering, we need to always remember your journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Babalta. I now want to call to the podium Rear Admiral Benjamin Nicholson, Commander for the Joint Region Marianas.
Thank you. Good morning. Buenos and half a day. Good morning, Governor, lawmakers, and of course, our most esteemed members of this gathering today, our war survivors. I am truly humbled to have the honor and privilege to stand before you and commemorate this day, which calls to attention the long and important history here on Guam of our war survivors. It's one thing to read about what happened during that period of time. It's another thing to meet the people that were there that experienced it. As I walked in the hall this morning and saw the wall with the names, I got a chill down my spine. It's one thing to read about the numbers of people. It's another thing to see all of their names listed. That's very moving. It's also another thing when you hear the stories that are told from the survivors. And I encourage everyone, if you have not had a chance to talk to a survivor and listen to their story, please do so. It will impact you in a way that you cannot imagine. The resiliency of the people of Guam is really summed up in the stories that you can hear from the war survivors. To endure such hardship under such difficult conditions, not knowing if every day was going to be their last, to hear that from the mouth of someone that was there is something you will never forget. To hear them tell the stories of the forced marches and the forced labor, and often seeing family members and friends killed or dying from the wounds that happened during those times. We must remember the sacrifices that they made to endure. Because if they had not endured and not come through, we would not have the society that we have today here in Guam. They made the bedrock and the foundation of what we have today. And I want to thank each and every one of them for what they've done, because it is an amazing feat to survive in the face of such a devastation and such hardship. Thank you for being the pillars upon which this island was rebuilt after the war. And thank you for sharing with us your stories. They will never be forgotten. You have my deepest gratitude and respect. Suzus Masi. Thank you.
Thank you, Rear Admiral. At this point, we have some remarks by Chairman Raul Gravalha, Chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee. Chairman Gravalha has been an advocate of Guam in pushing the war claims process forward in Congress. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we're unable to play his video, but he has asked that his remarks be read today, and we'd like to call on Senator Amanda Shelton to read the remarks, please.
As we approach the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Guam and the battle for the Northern Marianas, I am humbled and honored to pay tribute to the survivors of the 32-month occupation of Guam by Japanese forces during World War II. Struck by the horrors of World War II like no other American community, Guamanians understand, more than most, the meaning of sacrifice and loyalty. In addition to the suppression of their indigenous cultural traditions, Chamorros experienced great losses to life and livelihood. Nearly 1,200 Chamorros were killed, and another 14,721 suffered the cruelest atrocities of war, including beatings, forced labor, torture, and concentration camps. Survivors' accounts continue to remind us how deeply Guamanians paid for the freedoms we enjoy today. As we commemorate Guam War Survivor Remembrance Day, to recognize, honor, and remember the island's greatest generation, let us never take for granted the suffering they endured. Let us also honor the sacrifice of the Marines, soldiers, sailors, Coast Guardsmen, and airmen who gave their lives for our freedom. Raul M. Grijalva, Chair, House Committee on Natural Resources.
I now want to draw your attention to the TV screens again for a special video message by the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
As Speaker of the House, it is my solemn privilege to bring greetings from the Congress in commemoration of War Survivor Remembrance Day. Thank you to Governor Guerrero, Rear Admiral Nicholson, the War Survivor Remembrance Day Planning Committee, and all of today's organizers. As our nation reflects on the horrors of the occupation of Guam during World War II, we are reminded of the incredible strength and heroism of Guam's people. Facing inhumane cruelty, Guam's greatest generation brought to bear unimaginable courage, driven by profound resilience and unwavering patriotism. It is with deep respect that Congress voted to deliver reparations to Guam's war survivors and their families, seeking to make amends for this painful injustice. Today, the people of Guam continue to inspire all Americans through your love of country, boasting one of the nation's highest enlistment rates. The Congress remains committed to securing parity and justice for Americans in Guam and across the territories. Me Santa Marian Komalen continue to watch over you on this sacred day. Best wishes for a successful event, and Viva Guam.
Thank you so much. At this point, I'd like to call on the Honorable Lourdes Leon Guerrero, Governor of Guam, for her remarks.
Buenas and half a day. Si Deus maasene finatan mizu magi para ta honra esti I mananata ni manlalala después de higuera. Utungo ha na ane tiempen gera man patguna hamzu sa ukatkola I años ni gaigamzu durante gera 20 des 11 12 13 años sa hamzu ane di tempun gera. Lo utungo ha na an in hasu pudi gera man pinitihit. Sa talii sinanata and sitatata mas sacrifica todo I pinidesinia ni in esperanza gigera. Pues paguna dia in honra hamzu, paguna dia in hasu hamzu, paguna dia in nai hamzu respeto, za in sangani hamzu sizu usmaasi todo ni bindan mizu gitempengera, zan después de tempengera, zan pagutalo in naiham mege na minet gut and mege na minagov para itautauta. I'd like to thank the people of Guam for joining us today to help celebrate and honor our greatest generation. Our greatest generation's age during the war was probably only 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. But I know that the fears that they experience for the safety of their lives, the fears that they've experienced for the safety of their families are stories that will never be forgotten. But as a result of the strength and the courage that they had, they have brought our community more stronger. They have brought our community and our culture with great values and principles of human lives, with respect for authority, respect for freedom, respect for democracy, and of course, have helped move forward the liberation of our people. So on behalf of the people of Guam, thank you so much. My mom was also 13 years old during the war. And she told me a story that I wanted to share with you. And some of you probably already know this story because I have said it before. But when she was during the war, the women, the girls, were scared that they would get raped. They were scared that they would be captured by the Japanese to be concubines. They were scared for their lives. So my mother prayed to Our Lady of Lourdes and said to Our Lady of Lourdes that if you protect us and if you allow us to survive this war, I will call my first daughter Lourdes. And that's how I got my name, from Our Lady of Lourdes. I think it's a very touching story. And when my mom tells me that, you know, she cried because I'll tell you, everybody was very fearful for their lives. And that is why I think that our island is very patriotic. Our island knows what it is to suffer and to experience the atrocity of war. And our island knows what it means to also be liberated. But today, believe me, we honor you. We think about you. We are very grateful for all that you've done, and we appreciate all the courage and bravery that you have shown to us. So thank you, and again, on behalf of the people of Guam, Sidzu Usmasi, and know that you are very much loved. Thank you.
Governor, I'd like to ask that you stay at the podium as I call on Senor Joy Franquez for the reading of the proclamation. Senor, you can use this microphone. Governor will do the signing from that podium.
Hagåtña, Guam, Proclamation Number 2022-61. A proclamation of the Governor commemorating June 28, 2022 as War Survivor Remembrance Day. Whereas on December 8, 1941, the people of Guam were attending Mass to honor the feast of Guam's patron saint, Santa Maria in Camalin, Our Lady of Cameron, when the outbreak of World War II in the Pacific spread to the island through Japanese air attacks on U.S. military facilities on Guam. Only hours prior had the attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii pulled back the curtains on the theater of war in the Pacific. And whereas a small battalion of U.S. Navy sailors and militia members from the Guam Insular Force defended Guam in the heart of the island's capital of Hagåtña until the naval governor ultimately surrendered. More than 400 prisoners of war, including military personnel and American civilians, such as American priests, were interned in Hagåtña before being transported to a prison camp in Japan. And whereas over the course of the Japanese occupation, the experiences of the Chamorro throughout the war period varied from friendly encounters to extreme degrees of abuse and atrocity. And whereas the Chamorro adjusted to the requirements of the interim military command and were assigned to serve as teachers in mandated Japanese schools, field workers in food production for military officers, and laborers in Japanese construction projects, including the building of fortifications in the ground laying of an airfield. And whereas the most dire experiences involved instances of insubordination followed by punishments ranging from disfigurement and to execution. And whereas towards the end of the occupation, whether they were elderly or ill, Chamorros island-wide were forced to march to a narrow jungle valley concentration camp in Manangan, Zotña. At the same time, many Chamorro people considered insubordinate or a threat to Japanese control were executed in various massacre sites around the island, often by bayonet or explosives. And whereas on the eve of Guam's liberation, in the aftermath of massacres in the village of Malesut, one Chamorro group retaliated against a few remaining Japanese officers in charge, killing their remaining oppressors and effectively freeing their village. This event set forth the spirit of liberation that would carry the island over the next several days and weeks. And whereas on July 21st, 1944, scores of United States sailors, soldiers, and Marines braved through the barrages of shell fire, and they began their fight to free over 20,000 Chamorro people from the occupation. And whereas the U.S. Army scouts progressed across the island, Chamorro children could not help but to express excitement and earnest cheers of hope. Even the news of arriving American forces unchained the spirits of many in concentration camps, many who feared for the worst. And whereas, as the Battle of Guam wore on, the island ultimately was won back, and 14,721 sons and daughters of Guam freed. And whereas, in the aftermath of liberation, approximately 1,170 civilians and 1,880 American service members had perished. Nevertheless, their sacrifices and those of all who kept the flames of freedom burning are forever enshrined in the history of our island and the memory of our people. And whereas in modern times, there has been increased focus on Guam's war survivors and the stories they harbor from the historic period. They continue to carry painful memories of hardship, violence, and tragedy, as well as the destruction of land, homes, and lives. And whereas Public Law 33-56 designates June 28 of each year as War Survivor Remembrance Day, as the testament to members of Guam's greatest generation, and whereas this day is a special time of remembrance of all those who endured, sacrificed, and gave their lives for Guam. It is an annual opportunity for renewed understanding of the Chamorro experience and identity, and a reminder of our precious freedom. And whereas the people of Guam are forever indebted to our war survivors, who not only demonstrated bravery and courage, but also strength and resilience as they rebuilt their lives and the future of the island from the ashes of World War II.
Now, therefore, I, Lourdes A. Leon Guerrero, Magahagan Guahan, Governor of Guam, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Organic Act of Guam as amended, do hereby proclaim June 28, 2022, as War Survivor Remembrance Day, and do further call upon the people of Guam to join in reflecting upon and honoring the legacies of all those who have survived the war and engage in the rebuilding of the life and liberty we hold dear. In witness whereof, and together with the Segundo Magalahinguahan, Lieutenant Governor of Guam, Josh Tenorio, we have caused the Great Seal of Guam to be affixed in the capital city of Agutnia on this 28th day of June in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini 2022. Biba, war survivors! Biba! Biba to the greatest generation!
Viva!
Jesus Masi, Governor. I now want to call to the podium the Honorable Amanda L. Shelton for her remarks.
Wanis and Hafaday, our governor, colleagues, all of our military partners, and especially our war survivors. It's really a pleasure to see all of you here in person and to welcome you back to your Guam Congress building and to celebrate this day with you all, to remember you, your loved ones, your friends, your families, also who've passed before us, and the lives that you've lived. I was very moved as we were opening this ceremony and we began singing the Fanogi Chamorro, and I could hear the voices of our war survivors in the front, singing the lyrics, a call to action for us to honor and to give glory to our island, and then a prayer asking God to protect us, to continue watching over us. And as I look at all of you today, I see that this is how you've lived your life, a very beautiful example to all of us, giving honor and glory to our island, rebuilding, helping us to become the beautiful community that we are today, and living your lives with unceasing faith and constant prayer to our Lord, to Santa Maria and Kamalan, to watch over us, to protect us, and to continue giving us this blessed life we have here on our island. So I want to say thank you very much, Siduas Ma'asi, for all that you've done, all that you've given us, all that you've taught us, the values that you've instilled in us. And I want to make a continued promise to all of you, our greatest generation, that because of your example, because of the lives you lived, we will continue to make you proud, to live out this legacy for you as well, and all those we've lost in our greatest generation. Siduas Ma'asi. And I'd like to call up all of my colleagues who are here today to help me present our resolution. Resolution number 381-36, relative to recognizing the observance of War Survivor Remembrance Day on June 28, 2022, as part of the celebration of the 78th year anniversary of Guam's liberation, to pay tribute and commemorate all of the survivors of Guam's wartime occupation for their immense courage and perseverance, and commending the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation for their dedication and service in perpetuating the stories and accounts of the hardships of all those affected during the Japanese occupation of Guam during World War II, which your action
Whereas one of the most tragic and horrific events in our island's history occurred during World War II, from December 8, 1941 to August 10, 1944. And the atrocities that the enemy forces inflicted upon the people of Guam have left scars that will never heal. Chamorros were enslaved and forced to work for little to no compensation. And many families suffered the loss of personal property and their livelihoods. The rape of women was rampant, and children were unjustly robbed of their innocence. Thousands of Chamorros were subject to physical abuse, detention, and torture. And more than 1,000 residents were killed by the Japanese Imperial Army. These heinous actions that resulted in the deaths of many of our native inhabitants were truly devastating and traumatic. And in the end, the peaceful way of life that Chamorros had cherished before the war was lost forever.
Whereas on November 15, 1945, the U.S. Congress passed Public Law 79-225, the Meritorious Claims Act of 1945. The act authorized the Secretary of the Navy to adjudicate and settle claims for the purpose of granting immediate relief to the residents of Guam by the prompt settlement of meritorious claims. Although Guam had a surviving population of about 21,000 residents, only 6,646 claims were filed. The number was significantly lower than expected, considering that almost every individual who was on Guam during the occupation was subject to humiliation, beatings, and/or loss of property.
Whereas Guam continues to fight for appropriate recognition of those who suffered on Guam during World War II and from the U.S. Congress, we must do everything we can here on Guam to honor the memories and the stories of those who endured permanent suffering. The legacy and heritage of our war survivors, known as our greatest generation, should be recognized by all the people of Guam, and the War Survivors Memorial Day, Remembrance Day, is an appropriate day to honor the war survivors who have gone before us, to celebrate the lives of those still with us, and to remind all future generations that they must never forget the greatest generation in our Highlands history.
Whereas on June 26, 2015, Guam Public Law 33-56 was enacted, declaring that June 28 of each year be observed as War Survivors Remembrance Day. June 28th marks an important date in Guam's history, as it was the date that President Harry S. Truman transmitted a request to the U.S. House of Representatives for consideration of an appreciation for the Navy Department to pay claims for death on personal injury to residents on Guam for suffering through this war, and in recognition of the Chamorro people who endured one of the most tragic and horrific enemy occupations.
Whereas to help ensure that the sacrifice and legacy of Guam's war survivors is truly perpetuated for years to come, the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation was formed and organizes the War Survivor Remembrance Day events that cater to all age groups and walks of life. These events include a memorial mass that is held every year at the Dulce Nombre de Maria Cathedral Basilica and a concert series dedicated to the survivors of World War II, featuring music from that era, and the foundation has published books featuring the inspiring and heart-wrenching stories of war survivors and their families.
Whereas the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation also developed a website that is dedicated to allowing war survivors or their families with an outlet to share the hardships they faced during the Japanese occupation. Before the website was created, Senator Frank Blas Jr., president of the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation, his senatorial staff, their friends from Expressions Studio, and companies who kindly offered their help, started a weekly series in the Guam edition of the Marianas Variety newspaper called Real People, Real Stories. And they provided transcribed testimonies from the war survivors who spoke before the Guam War Claims Review Commission in December of 2003. Real People, Real Stories was created to educate the community about the horrendous experiences of the Chamorro people during the war and to remind the U.S. government of its obligation to compensate those who survived the war and the heirs of those who were killed.
Whereas the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation, in collaboration with the Guam Economic Development Authority, PBS Guam, KUAM Communications, and Shooting Star Productions, presented tributes to Guam's World War II survivors through various productions, such as Sentimental Journey, Guam Songs Remembered, in 2020, which featured songs that were popular during the Japanese occupation of Guam in World War II, and Let Your Spirit Dance during War Survivor Remembrance Day in 2021, which featured Guam's younger generation paying tribute to war survivors through their joy and dancing. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Committee on Rules of Iminay 36 na Legislature in Guahan does hereby, on behalf of the Legislature in Guahan and the people of Guam, recognize the observance of War Survivor Remembrance Day on June 28, 2022, as part of the celebration of the 78th year anniversary of Guam's liberation, to pay tribute and commemorate all of the survivors of Guam's wartime occupation for their immense courage and perseverance, and commend the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation for their dedication and service in perpetuating the stories and accounts of the hardships of all those affected during the Japanese occupation of Guam during World War II. And be it further resolved that the Speaker and the Chairperson of the Committee on Rules certify, and the Legislative Secretary attest to the adoption hereof, and that copies of the same be thereafter transmitted to Senator Frank Blas Jr., President of the Guam War Survivors Memorial Foundation, and to the Honorable Lourdes A. Leon Guerrero y Megahagan Guahan. So we're going to present the resolutions to our war survivors. I want to say thank you very much on behalf of the people of Guam, again, for your service, your dedication, the lives that you've lived. And danklu na situas maasi. This is also a very special moment for Senator Talina. She wanted to present it personally to her grandmother in the front row.
Sizos Masi, Senator Shelton, and to the members of the 36th Guam Legislature for that resolution. I can assure you it's all smiles up here in the first row from what I can see. I also wanted to go back into my introductions, and I want to apologize and reintroduce her again. I may have rushed through your name. Former Senator Carmen Casper Bauer. Can we give her a round of applause? A proper introduction. And while this concludes our event here, I want to encourage everyone to please view the Wall of Strength at the Guam Congress Building lobby, and then go ahead and proceed to Mass at 9:30 for the War Survivor Remembrance Mass at the Dulce Nombre de Maria Cathedral Basilica with the choir, music performed by Una Voce Choir. So Sizos Masi for joining us today. Please view the Wall of Strength outside and have a beautiful day.